Putin's bridge of dreams evaporates in flames, and the main question is Putin ready to lose Crimea? At the same time, Russians increase the intensity of their offensive in the east, and we have a major deal right now, which is already off the table. But more about all of this in just a couple of minutes. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And let's get straight to the point and talk about some ridiculous Russian propaganda. So, recently we had these toys in Russia called Cheburashka, this fictional character with very big ears who was spreading love, understanding and forgiveness. And well, Russians decided to put the symbol on it, put some aggressive heads, and make it like this symbol of aggression against Ukraine. Well, I mean, not aggression, from their perspective, it is the symbol of defending themselves against Ukrainians while fighting on the territory of Ukraine. That's as much as I could understand and explain the Russian narrative and their mindset. But okay, now let's switch our attention to the main topic of the video, which is Putin's favorite Crimean Bridge being once again attacked, most likely by Ukrainians, and whether Putin is now ready to give up Crimea. Then we'll talk about a major deal being now off the table, and then we'll finalize everything with the quick update from the south and the east of Ukraine, where Russians increased their offensive a lot. And long story short, this last night there were at least 2 attacks against Crimean Bridge, which completely destroyed one of its sections, making it impossible to use for the land transport. Well, Russian authorities at first they said that there were no damages at all, then they said that there were some minor damages, and then they had to acknowledge that yes, we have to close this section of the bridge. They also mentioned that the railway section of the bridge is still intact, as you can see from this video, but just once again, you can clearly see that one of the support columns of the road part of the bridge is now completely gone. And allegedly, these were Ukrainians behind this attack, and most likely they used these kind of water drones, which look like jet skis, which are carrying some explosive material. And if you remember, the attacks against Crimean Bridge or any other important object for Putin in the past, it almost always led to escalation, first from the Russian side and then a powerful response from Ukrainians. And this time it is no different. Putin had a meeting with his inner circle and he mentioned that the Ministry of Defense of Russia is already developing an appropriate response plan. And since this attack against Crimean Bridge just happened recently, we are yet to see what kind of escalation will happen, but almost certainly it will happen, and I will be here to report on this event as soon as I hear something myself, so if you don't want to miss it, can you please like this video and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow my second channel, Russian Dude Clips, where I post under 1-minute summaries every single day. The link is down below. And so yes, as of right now, one of the main questions is whether Putin is preparing to give up Crimea. So let's talk about this right now, then we'll talk about this major deal being off the table, and then a quick update from the south and the east of Ukraine. And to begin with, we have a pretty ridiculous statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, which honestly should have been included in the ridiculous Russian propaganda section today. And what they basically said is that the responsible sides for this attack against Crimean Bridge are also Americans and British. It's pretty much like, yeah, within the Russian authorities, if something bad happens, always blame Americans. But okay, then we have the statement by Dmitry Medvedev from almost exactly 1 year ago, when he said that in case there are any attacks against the territory of Crimea or its bridge, the response of Russia will be quick and fearless, once again referring to the nuclear weapons. Well, it did happen 1 year later, and Medvedev is completely silent. He only said that in response to that we should destroy the house of Zelensky. And then, according to the Deputy Minister of Construction and Development of Russia, Marat Husnulin, who at first was saying that nothing significant happened to the bridge, and later he said that, yeah, we will kinda have to close it until September 15th at least. And then he and some other Russian authorities, they mentioned to the Russian people who wanted to visit Crimea to consider using a detour. Instead of just going through the bridge, now they will have to go through the temporarily occupied territories in the south of Ukraine. pretty much almost next to the front lines with one of the most intense combat activities. And the detour itself will take some additional dozens of hours. So long story short, does not look appealing, at least personally to me. But the most important thing, as you can see, is that the narrative of Russian authorities, including Putin himself, has dramatically softened in regards to Ukrainians attacking Crimean Bridge. At first, they were saying this will be completely unacceptable act of terrorism by Ukrainians. And now they're saying, well, yeah, it happened, we will start repairing it. My condolences to unfortunately injured and wounded and eliminated civilians, but the life goes on, so I mean, let's keep going, let's repair the bridge and come back to invade Ukraine. For this reason, according to the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, he thinks that in case there is immense pressure by Ukrainians and they will be threatening Crimea, Putin will most likely find the reasons and explanation why he had to give up Crimea and give these reasons to Russian population. At the same time, Putin will also be able to find the proper explanation why Russians had to surrender temporarily occupied territories, though it will be much easier rather than to explain the loss of Crimea. And most likely, this is just the assumption for now, is that Putin will be pushing the narrative of Russia against NATO, not Russia against Ukraine or saving its own people. So, I mean, let's see, it will be honestly very curious to see how the narrative of the Russian authorities will change as soon as Ukrainians will start actively pushing in the south of Ukraine, especially because recently Valery Zaluzhny, he also mentioned that Ukraine will retake Crimea no matter what, even if its Western partners will be against it. But wait, there is more, because we have potentially one more consequence of this attack against Crimean Bridge, which is this major deal between Russia, Ukraine, United Nations and Turkey about this grain deliveries, the grain deal of the Black Sea. And long story short, according to Dmitry Peskov, the participation of Russia in this grain deal as of right now is fully terminated. Because he says that the Western countries, Ukraine, was not respecting Russia, not respecting the terms and conditions of this deal, so I mean there is no point in Russia staying in it. And there is some even small assumptions by some Ukrainian authorities that probably, just probably, this is once again just assumption, that maybe these were Russians who attacked the Crimean Bridge themselves just to find a reasonable excuse why they should leave this grain deal. I will leave it totally up to you whether you want to believe this version or not. But after all, according to President Zelensky, he said that Ukraine is not afraid that Russia is leaving this deal. After all, Ukraine had an agreement between this country, the United Nations and Turkey, so Ukraine will do everything possible to continue supplying the grains. But okay, and now let me give you an extremely quick update from the south of Ukraine before we move to the east and talk about Russians increasing their offensive activities in this region, before we finalize everything and talk about the main takeaways of the day. And first of all, over this weekend, there was this video where allegedly a civilian car in Oleshki has been completely destroyed by a missile. Well, Russians obviously blamed Ukrainians, but those people living in the area, they were able to establish the location where this thing happened, and apparently there was no way that this missile came from the right side of Kherson region where Ukrainians are. Most likely it came from the left one where Russian positions are, so most likely, long story short, this was a Russian missile. As we go to Zaporozhye region, this is where one of the most intense combat activities are happening right now as we speak, and then Ukrainians also released this video where they're trying to assault the positions of Russians and they're getting relatively successful. For obvious reasons due to its content and consequences, this video will never be allowed on YouTube. That is why if you want to see the full and uncensored version, it will be uploaded on my Patreon. There is still 1 week free access and the link is down below. At the same time, we have yet another video from Zaporozhye region where allegedly a Ukrainian HIMARS is destroying a Russian artillery system called Gyatsit. And even more, recently, according to some Ukrainian Western partners, Russia already lost its artillery superiority in the south of Ukraine, because Ukrainians, such as for example HIMARS systems, they usually have a much longer range, and the rest of just Western military equipment is superior to those which Russians have. And for example, the next video also comes to us from the Zaporozhye region, where a pretty big convoy of Russian military vehicles and artillery systems has been completely obliterated as a result of a Ukrainian attack. And so, what is the response of Russians? Let me know in the comments what do you think. I can give you like 3 seconds. So yes, long story short, as always, Russians attack the residential areas, such as for example this one in Zaporozhye region. Well, no surprise here. So now let's get back to Oleshki once again, because recently Ukrainians were able to destroy several vehicles of Russians and military equipment to the north of this city. And as we go back to Zaporozhye region and take a look at this map, which shows us the changes in territorial control, first of all, you can see that Ukrainians liberated just a little bit more land to the west of Lapkove, but then as you go to Orikhiv, unfortunately, as you can see, to the south of this area, Russians recaptured some land. But reportedly, and this has even been confirmed by some Russian propagandists, Ukrainians were able to establish the control over Staromayorsk, which, as you can see from this map, is not yet confirmed. And then, as you go a little bit to the east, Ukrainians were also able to destroy 2 artillery firing positions of Russians next to Kremenchuk and 3 other pieces of military equipment. And just once again referring to this map, we can see that Russians recaptured unfortunately a little bit more land to the north of Priyutne, but as we go more to the east, Ukrainians were able to advance closer to Staromayorsk. This is confirmed by this map so far. And just overall, during the last several days, Ukrainians were able to advance a total of 1700 meters in Zaporozhye front lines, which is approximately 1 mile. But okay, and now as promised, let's go to the east of Ukraine and talk about the increase of Russians of their offensive activities, and then we'll finalize everything with the main takeaways, important takeaways of the day. But first of all, we just have to make a stop on the territory of Russia in this city called Yeisk, where recently a Russian pilot was testing his fighter jet, where allegedly one of engines stopped working, so he fell into the sea. The pilot ejected, but he was still later pronounced ceased to exist later in the hospital. Then we refer to the report by the Institute for the Study of War, which claims that Russians increased their offensive activities along Kupiansk-Svatovo front line, and they were even able to make some small gains around Crimea. And indeed, this information has been confirmed by some other Ukrainian authorities, such as for example Anna Malyar and General Alexander Syrsky, who are mentioning that the main concentration of Russian attacks as of right now is around Crimea area. And as you can see from this map, there are approximately 7 directions where Russians right now attack. But if we take a look at this map and go to this area, we can see that advancement of Russians next to Crimea to the north of Kharkiivka is pretty much minimal. And as we get closer to Bakhmut, specifically to the settlement called Orekhovo-Vasilievka, we can see that Russians also advanced a little bit closer, just a little bit. At the same time, Ukrainians were able to destroy an artillery firing position of Russians next to Berestove, and then another assault group of Russians to the north of Yahidne. And right here is the video from the east of Ukraine, where a Russian armored personnel carrier is getting destroyed by ammunition called Bonus. And the way it works is very interesting and very curious. It pretty much starts going towards the armored personnel carrier, then it detonates mid-air, and then pretty much the munition destroys the target. I don't think I've ever seen something like this, so if you want to see it also yourself, the full version is on my Patreon, the link is down below. And then we have yet another photo confirmation of Ukrainians using Russian seized heavy flamethrower called Solntsepek. This thing does massive damage and obliterates the positions of Russians. And ultimately, according to once again Anna Malyar, Ukrainians were able to liberate already approximately 31 square kilometers around Bakhmut, and the total area which is liberated since the beginning of this counteroffensive is approximately 210 square kilometers. And in addition to that, right here is the statistics of both Russian and Ukrainian losses over the last weekend, from Friday, July 14th until Sunday, July 16th. And as you can see, the total number of lost military vehicles by Ukrainians is 13, while the total number of Russian lost military vehicles is 66. And this is taking into consideration that the side which is performing the offensive actions usually suffers much bigger losses. Well, not in this case. And so yes, as a result, what do we have at this very moment? The main event of the day is that obviously Crimean Bridge has been attacked, most likely by Ukrainians, and there are very big speculations right now whether is Putin already started to look for excuses and explanations why he will have to surrender Crimean Peninsula in the future. Now, I personally do not know whether this will happen, or Putin will fight until the very last soldier to keep Crimea, but this is just the facts which are available on the public access in the internet. At the same time, we have an increase in offensive activities by Russians in the east, along Kupiansk, Svatovo, Crimea front line, but as of right now their gains are absolutely minimal. And to sum things up, Ukraine still continues to receive Western military support, while now trying to preserve as many Western military vehicles as possible. And most likely what is going to happen is that Ukraine will continue to resist the attacks by Russians in the east, while simultaneously applying the pressure in the south, and then once Russian forces are completely exhausted mentally and physically, this is when Ukraine might double down on its counteroffensive efforts and liberate major territories. And as soon as it does start to happen, I will be here to report, so please, if you don't want to miss them, can you please subscribe to my channel? Literally just takes one click. The absolutely best way to support my work is through my Patreon. You can also become my channel member or simply use the PayPal link. Everything can be found to the right and down below. Thank you so much for attention, товарищи. Beware there are scammers in the comments. Please follow me on Instagram and see you tomorrow.